Okay. All right. All right. So the first thing I'd like you guys to do, if you wouldn't mind, is just to take a moment. Let me move my thing over here. And if you would just write down or make some type of mental note about what it is that you would like to get out of this workshop, because I find that whenever we set some type of intention or goal at the beginning, then we're more likely to get what we want when we focus on that. So you can just, if you want to drop it in the chat, you're more than welcome to, or just make a note for yourself on whatever that might be. Okay, value prep. Okay. Do you mean, Frank, about like your like illicit, like where your values are and like where your values stand compared to like your goal? Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, I mean, I've done many masterminds. I've been to Tony Robbins. I've been to so many personal development, professional development, and obviously something caught my attention where I decided to join today.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, let's see if you have a specific proprietary approach to handling, different areas of business or more on the personal side. So like I said, I come into this with an open mind, just to learn a little bit more about your offering and what it is that you do. I'm in a major entrepreneurial growth state right now. I've
Mhm.
got a thriving business, and then I also just took on a new corporate role. So I'm very diverse in all the many things that I do. So I'm always looking to become better, and that's what brings me here today. So value prop, just understanding exactly the value that someone like myself could gain out of a service like yours.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry I misread that. I just meant it, I read it as value prep because we are going to be going over our personal values in a couple of days. So I
Yeah.
apologize. I misread that. So that makes sense.
No,
Okay.
no. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, just yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Hmm.
All right. So this is gosh, I might have to move. I didn't really prepare for the video here. So this is a picture of me a few years ago where I was anxious, stressed. I could probably write 100 different things that I was struggling with in my life. Very difficult situation with my health, with my work, with my family. There was a lot of stress and tension in all of the different areas. And I got to a point in my life where it took me a while to kind of realize what was going on. And I finally came to this conclusion, if I could summarize everything that I learned in those couple of years of challenges, is that it's not necessarily the thing in particular that I might be focusing on that's the problem, but it's really the way or how I'm looking at the thing that is the main focus that I need to work on. And so it really took me a long time, about 35, 40 years for me to figure this out. So there was a lot that got me to that point in realization. So I kind of developed my own personal definition of stress, and this might be something that evolves over time, but based off of where I am today in my life, this is my own conclusion is that stress is really basically something that manifests in us whenever we feel like we don't have a lot of choices, when we feel like we're in a corner and we just don't have a way out. And this really became apparent to me. I used this AI picture to illustrate this because whenever I had my son, when he was a couple years old, I was looking for parenting advice. And one of the things that was mentioned to me is give your child some options. So instead of telling your child you have to wear your coat before you go outside, you ask them, which coat do you want to wear? And so instead of getting into this really stressful conversation with your child and arguing about whether they should wear a coat or not, you give them some options around that. And children are very, very receptive to that. And I found that this is really something that applies to adults as well, is that when we feel like we have options, when we don't have to just get stuck in one place and we have different possibilities, then it kind of frees up this space in our mind and it kind of lifts this burden that we may feel like that we're carrying around. And this might be something that you guys are already familiar with, but a lot of times people talk about the left and the right side of the brain, but I love to talk about the conscious and the unconscious mind. And basically, the conscious mind, many of us use it on a regular basis. I used it a lot in my tech role, and being a very analytical, like a mathematical black and white person. And so this is how this part of the brain works. It's very logical, tries to make sense out of things. And then we have the unconscious part of the brain, which kind of works behind the scenes. And it's responsible for learning really quickly. It learns super fast, instantaneously. It's responsible for storing our memories, and it's very tied to the emotional part of the brain. So there's a little bit of a balance there between the conscious and the unconscious processes. So my intention for this particular workshop and for all of you that are here is for me to be a foundation for you to take back your power to choose. So what you want to choose is perfectly up to you. I want to take you on a journey where you can see where you have options and possibility where maybe you didn't see or notice that before. So this is a really fun example that I saw in some type of presentation or workshop, and it's been so long that I can't even remember where I found it. And I've done this with my family actually, and it was a really fun exercise and really tells you a lot about how people think. And so this is something I wanted to do with you all because I think it's a really perfect illustration. So the only thing I'm going to share here is that we have a stick figure. We have two stick figures. I'm just going to call them person A and person B. And so basically what happens is person A goes over to person B and just hits them. And so whenever you hear me say that, I just want you to take a note and like a mental note on, did something come up for you, maybe an image or a video or a thought inside of your head about person A going over and hitting person B? Just take a moment to think about whatever that might be and how that shows up for you. If you want to share it in the chat, you're welcome to, but just take a note and see what you notice. Let me know if something comes up for you. How many of you noticed that maybe your brain was maybe trying to create some story or filling in the gaps with like this little bit of information that I gave you? So what I noticed whenever I did this with a small group of people before, so yes, Erin says yes, you noticed something. Yeah, it's really interesting because this actually struck me because I noticed that my brain instantly tried filling in the gaps and creating this story, and I was only given a tiny little bit of information. And so this can happen to us in a lot of different scenarios. This is probably one that a lot of us can relate to, where we might have sent a text or tried to call somebody and then we don't get a response back. And so then we start thinking all of these things to ourselves. Maybe this person doesn't like me and they're upset about something that I did. Did I do something wrong? We have all of these conclusions and we try to make sense, right? Our brain is like frantically looking for answers on explaining why we didn't get a response. And it's really quite interesting when we can get to that place and thinking about what those thoughts might be. Yeah. Yeah, Gina. So you were wondering why someone would hit someone else. Yeah, that's a really good question. So part of this, we're going to be talking about how our brain comes up with these ideas and like what's the intention behind it and why do we think certain things or ask certain questions and creating that possibility, right? So that's just kind of like a little silly example, a silly illustration, but it applies to so many different areas of our life. And when we have specific roadblocks, when we feel like we're stuck, or when there's a specific goal that we're trying to achieve, sometimes we can have all of these thoughts that come up that block us, and we wonder, Why are these here? What's the intention with this? So what happens is that we make meaning out of our circumstances. So just like in the phone call, right? Like we can tell ourselves these stories about why somebody didn't respond or why something else happened. And sometimes we might even be surprised later where we realize we made some conclusion and we really didn't have evidence to back it up. And then we realize, uh-oh, that actually wasn't true. And sometimes that can put us in a funny situation. So really what I want you all to think about is like, what meaning are you making out of your circumstances? And is that meaning that you're making, is it really benefiting you, or is that meaning keeping you stuck? So some of the things that I hear a lot from people is, I'm not smart enough, people don't like me. There's so many different thoughts and beliefs that we make meaning out of our situations. So we might be in unpleasant situations. In order for us to make sense out of it, we try to draw some conclusion so that we can move past it. And oftentimes we take that on to be a personal burden where we make meaning about ourselves. And I really love this analogy because a lot of us are really familiar with social media and how you could be on your phone and you think that your phone is spying on you because you were talking about, headphones to somebody the other day, and then all of a sudden you have 100 ads showing up on your phone about headphones and how there's all these sales and deals going on. So our brain works a lot like these algorithms do in technology. So whatever information you want to see, what kind of inputs you put into your brain, whatever you allow and focus on, that's what you're going to get more of. So the really cool thing about this is that sometimes we might feel like, oh, I don't really know how to get out of this way of thinking. Like I'm just kind of in this rut. But the cool thing is that just like an algorithm on, in your phone or in some app that you use, it's actually really easy to shift your algorithm to focus on other things. And I'll be getting into more about how we do that in some examples. But I really love this analogy because I think it's really a perfect example of how the brain works. So this was something that I heard like a little example of a few weeks ago. And again, I come across so much information and I can't even remember where this came from, but it was portrayed as though it was a true story. I don't know if it was, but basically there was this example of there were 18 federal agents. They all went into this room and they were all given one piece of information. There was one person, a 19th person, who wasn't a federal agent, and he was not given any information at all. They all went into one room and they were shown one image. I can't remember the image, I just made something up on the fly, but let's say it was a picture of a pig. So they went around all of the rooms and asked every single one of the federal agents, what is this a picture of? And they all said it was a yellow pig. And then when they got to the 19th person in the room who wasn't a federal agent, he thought, okay, I've heard 18 people, all of these people telling me that this is a yellow pig, but I'm seeing a pink pig. Am I missing something here? Am I doing something wrong? Like, what's wrong with me that I'm not seeing what other people are seeing? And so we can find ourselves in situations like this all of the time where we could be surrounded by people that have certain belief systems or certain thought processes or perspectives on the situation. And then we can start to question ourselves and even make meaning and conclusions about ourselves and start to lose trust about our abilities and able to do things. And so I think this is a really brilliant illustration for, again, how our environment plays such a key role in our thought processes and what we actually can do and what we believe in ourselves as being capable of. So this is just another quick like demo illustration on how our brain works. So I just want everybody, if you can just take a few moments and just kind of look around the room that you're in and see if you can notice everything in your room that has the color red. Let me know in the chat if you guys are able to notice everything in your room that's red. Hopefully you all have something in your room that's red. Okay, Gina, you see some red stuff? Okay, all right. Yeah, you guys are all seeing red. All right, now I have a really funny question you're probably not expecting. How many blue things did you notice in your room? Did anybody notice anything blue? Can you list all the things that you saw when you were looking around your room for or for red things? Did you notice anything that was blue? Nope. Oh, okay, your room's blue. Nice. So I think this I love this example because this is really how quickly our brain works. We can give our brain a very simple instruction or suggestion to focus on something, and it does exactly what we tell it to do. And so this is just a testament to how quickly we can start to change our thoughts and about how we can start to do that. But the unconscious mind learns really quickly. So if you give it a reason and an intention for doing something, that aligns with you and your core and your values, then that can actually be a really rapid process. It can take place really quickly. And we've probably all heard this reference before, where we go to buy this car and we think, wow, this car is going to stand out. I haven't seen anybody driving this car before. This is one of a kind, and we really feel good about our new purchase. And then we realize that lo and behold, this car is everywhere. And it really doesn't make sense that this car all these people bought this car at the same time that you did. But what happened is that we changed our perception of reality. We started noticing different things. And so, because we changed our focus, the things that we notice seem to change as well. So the reality didn't change, it's just the way that we were looking at our reality was changing. And so sometimes this can be a little bit of an uncomfortable process, right? And pulling our head out of the sand. But really, the one thing that I've realized is that if I'm not getting what I want, right? If I have this goal and it's ethical and it's ecological and there's no reason why I shouldn't accomplish or achieve this goal, if I'm not getting it, then I have to consider the possibility that my focus is elsewhere. And I might not even know where my focus is, and that's totally okay. But if we can at least recognize and come to that fact where, okay, acknowledging I'm not there yet, is there something that I'm missing here? Is my focus maybe elsewhere? And I love this picture because really how we change our focus. Like this is an internal, I call it like an internal filtration system. Our brains can only process and gather so much information at one time. So if you think about what you're exposed to in just 1 hour of your day, it's millions of bits of data and information that's just impossible for you to process like that. So what you do, we all do this, is we have an internal filtration system where we only gather certain bits of information and we store that based off of our our individual values and beliefs. So there's a few other things that go into this, but values and beliefs are very tied together. And so, if you're focused, let's keep it simple. If you're just focusing on the color red, for instance, you're not going to be noticing the yellow and purple pieces. But if you want to start noticing other pieces of the puzzle, you're going to have to adjust your values and beliefs at least slightly in order to accommodate those other pieces that you want to start noticing. And this is going back to, your values and beliefs are something that you form from a very, very young age, but those are something that are fluid and adjust throughout your entire lifetime. They're not stagnant. So, basically, one of the things that we have to think about is has somebody already accomplished or achieved exactly what we want to achieve? So whenever I was struggling a couple of years ago, I had plenty of examples around me of people that had what I was trying to achieve. And so I had to ask myself, what are the beliefs or rules that they're living by? They're internal, like how are they processing? What is their perception on their situation that allowed them to achieve or to have what it is that I'm trying to get? And sometimes we don't even know what that is. But when we start to ask the question and allowing our brain, we start guiding our brain to make some observation and consider that possibility. That's really the first step towards achieving a goal. I call it like ground zero. So, whenever we think about our beliefs and how we process information, we have to ask ourselves, is this belief or thought process, is it serving me? Is it empowering or disempowering? So there's so many different, let me move this out of the way here. There's so many different questions that we can ask ourselves. And sometimes it might be obvious, like, yeah, I get it. Like this belief isn't doing me any good. And so sometimes we might think, oh, how do I just get rid of it? Or, we just think of some way of like a quick fix, right? So we're going to get into what do we do when we realize that we have some belief or some thought process that isn't serving us in the best way possible. So I did mention that we were going to be talking about emotional triggers, and basically, I look at an emotional trigger as some type of external stimulus that can produce some type of response. I've seen it produce physical sensations and responses, emotional responses, or like this cascade of thoughts that go with it. And basically, I put this picture here of this dot to dot. I think probably all of us can remember doing a dot to dot when we were kids. So basically, what happens is just like we talked about in the previous examples, our brain tries to fill in the gaps or to make sense out of our circumstances, and so we connect the dots and make meaning out of things that may or may not be doing us of service. And so we have to sometimes look at, okay, what is actually triggering me? Sometimes we don't even know what our trigger is. And that's okay because we can get to the place where we do understand that. But once we get to the point of understanding that we do have a trigger and we understand what it is, then we can get to, okay, how was this created and what can we do about it? I'll give an example, actually, a personal example that taught me the most about emotional triggers. I had heard about them a lot, but it wasn't until I saw it physically in my world that it really sunk in with me. I have a Blue Merle Collie, and he's a very family-oriented dog and really loves to spend time with all of us. And I started noticing one day that he became very upset and anxious when he noticed that I was washing water bottles. So I have some glass water bottles that I typically get ready for, go hiking or for going out for a long day. And so I noticed that he was starting to make these connections between the water bottle and me leaving the house. And so he became emotionally triggered by my water bottle. It became a symbol and a representation of me leaving. And he really likes to come participate. He doesn't like being left by himself. And so if I were to consider that situation, I can make some assumptions around what Jackson, my dog, believes about himself, and I can't claim that I know how all of the animals, their brains work, but we can kind of compare that and use it in parallel to the human brain. That I can make some assumptions that Jackson thinks that, I'm never coming back, or that I'm abandoning him, or that, I don't like being around him. He can make all kinds of assumptions and beliefs about what it means whenever I leave the house. And so this water bottle became a representation of that negative experience. And what's really interesting is that even if I'm washing a water bottle and putting it back into the cabinet for the next time, he still is anchored to that water bottle as though it's a negative thing. And so what's really fascinating is that if Jackson, let's say Jackson wanted to retrain his brain to like disconnect this trigger, this emotional trigger, so he no longer had this emotional upset from a water bottle, he would have to understand what does this trigger represent? Like what am I meaning making this to mean about myself or my situation, and reverse engineer it. So he would have to look at all of the other times that I wash the water bottle and I don't leave the house. But he doesn't do that. He just only gets upset about the water bottle all the time because he has enough evidence from his past that this water bottle means something bad is going to happen, something negative is going to happen. So we'll talk a little bit more about some practical examples of how can we disconnect these triggers. But this thing with my dog was like my first realization, like, wow, this is really powerful, and really these emotional triggers can come up anywhere in our life. So this is just an example of how we can be tied to different things. This this particular sign, I'm sure, represents something to all of you, and I'm sure that on some level it represents very similar meaning. But this is just an example of how one thing we could have this, or like a stop sign or something that we can all see that has no words, there's no narrative to this symbol, but just seeing the symbol, we have been trained somehow in our past to make some kind of meaning out of the sign so we can make connections to it. Now, can we train our brain to think differently or to form different meanings about the sign? Well, yes, absolutely. It would take some time and we would have to collect some evidence to convince our brain that, hey, this sign can actually mean something else. But for a lot of us, it could mean, it means what mostly by society's definition, this is what it means to all of us. And this is just another example of how we are surrounded by symbols and representations of those and definitions in our environment. So um, one question that I ask myself, and this is something that I ask in a little bit of a different way if I'm asking it to somebody else, or if I'm interacting with like a family member or something where I notice they're being triggered. This really helps me not to be emotionally triggered by other people's stuff. Because I know that if somebody else is really upset about something, right? If I'm coming from a place of calm and compassion, and I can verify in myself that I didn't make a misstep or do something wrong in this situation, that I know if somebody else is triggered or acting out of, the norm, that they're triggered because they somehow are making some kind of negative meaning about the circumstance. They're making some meaning about themselves. So it's not about me, it's about them and what meaning they're making. So I know that if they're being triggered, that there's some type of belief that they have about themselves that is being triggered by this circumstance. So it's helped me in my personal life, and whenever I get triggered, I take a moment to ask myself, what am I believing about myself right now because of this? And sometimes I don't always have the answer right off the bat. But just asking that question can really just set us up for getting answers, really, quite honestly. So this is one thing that um, really has helped me is trying to draw that line between where do we take responsibility for things, right? So sometimes we take responsibility for things that we have no business taking responsibility for. And so to some extent, we are responsible for our environment and for the people that we surround ourselves with. We do have choices to some extent. But if we're in situations just being normal human beings, we're going to be exposed to inputs that we don't necessarily have control over. And so we have to remember that we're only responsible for our outputs, for our reactions to what we're exposed to. We're not necessarily responsible for the inputs or what we're being exposed to in our environment. So this is my personal steps. If I were to simplify the different steps for creating positive change, it's starting with an attitude of curiosity. So that means not having any judgments, not having any conclusions or answers necessarily. Because our conscious brain is trying to fix things. It's trying to make sense out of stuff. But if we can put that conscious part of our brain, just ask it if we can just have it sit beside us and let us just maintain some curiosity, that really is a game changer. Just being able to get into that place alone. And then after we get into that place of curiosity, we'll notice that we start to have some awareness. It's kind of like the blinders that we have where we only notice so many things at one time. Once we get curious, then we can start noticing other things that we didn't notice before. And then once we get into that place of awareness, we start to gather data. I like to say evidence, but data kind of fits better in this example, I guess. So it allows our brain to start collecting data to think about other possibilities. What else could this mean? Then when we get to that place where our brain is kind of on board, we got a conscious brain and our unconscious brain, that part of our mind that starts to come into alignment and see, yes, I have data and I have evidence to think differently about this situation. That's when we get back our power to choose. That's the decision-making process. And we might not be consciously aware of spending a lot of time in every single one of these steps, but the quicker that your brain, basically your internal system, the quicker that it starts to trust you and realize that, yes, you've done this before and it knows kind of the steps and process, it gets to be quicker and quicker. So this was me this summer. I was only eating 10 foods for 7 years. And basically, what happened, if I were to summarize this in a very short summary, that I realized that I was into this place where I was taking on a lot of beliefs. I was in environments where I was accepting. So there's again the key here. I was accepting. Nobody was able to force me to do anything. I was accepting other people's beliefs, perspectives, and thought processes about my situation and what it was that I should do for me and my particular health situation, because that's why I started on this journey, was to get my health back on track. And whenever I got to the place where I was disconnecting my triggers, I was looking at what I was making things mean about myself and my situation, I was I was giving my brain permission to start thinking about my situation differently. And I started to realize that I wasn't really in control of my life. I was allowing everybody else to tell me how to think and what to do. And it really took some time for me to just kind of break out of that and realize, no, I actually have the power to choose differently. I have the power to choose my own belief system and my own thought process. And just because in the past I thought somebody else knew better than I did, I can take that power back and choose differently. And so I ate my first meal from a food truck. It's not something I do very often, but I was in a situation where it just made sense. And so I went from a place of only eating 10 foods because I was just completely paralyzed um, by my belief system if I were to eat anything outside of those 10 foods. And I got my brain to trust me that I can have a different belief system and that I could eat whatever I wanted and not have any negative consequences from it. So that's not a process that happens overnight necessarily, but it did take some time and I was able to get to that place. So I hope this can be some encouragement to you guys that I really don't believe there's much that we can't do, outside of specific scientific laws like gravity and things like that. Like, what is it that we're believing about ourselves that we're not doing? And a lot of it comes from fear. That was my particular situation. So I know we're getting close here to the end, so I wanted to leave a few minutes here for questions. But my goal here was to really use money mindset as a gateway, as a doorway into the brain, into learning all of these concepts. And whether finances or increasing your money flow, cash flow, whatever that is, if that's not a priority for you, that's perfectly fine. But the concepts that we're going to be learning and applying in the next few days, it will really apply to any area of your life. I'm just using finances as a practical example that we can kind of all relate to because obviously we all interact with money on a daily basis. So um, I just call this a homework assignment, but basically, I'm going to be doing this guy with you guys. I did this just recently, but I do want to do it with you, so it's kind of like fresh in my head, and we're doing it together. But one of the best things that you can do is if you want to know about your thought process, about your belief system, about your values, and really that entire framework, there's two ways to do it that I found. One is by doing it through financial tracking, tracking everything that you spend, everything that you earn, looking at the credit card, the bank statements, PayPal, even, because that cannot always show details on the bank account. And if you can go through every single one of those line items, which, I'm going to say, like, this isn't like the most fun thing to do. I get it. I've done this and it takes some work and effort. But if you can take some time, if you have some time to do that sometime today or tonight before we meet again tomorrow, this will really come in handy for all of the other things that we're doing. If you can go in and just track all of those things, and I like writing it down because I think there's something very special about um, taking pen to paper. And once you do that, try to put things into like a category, like needs versus nice to have. And then there's going to be a few other things that we're going to do into getting into that. And you don't have to share any of this information. This is just me providing a framework so you can kind of do this on your own. But if you can take some time to do this, sometime today or tomorrow before our next gathering, this will really, really help all of the rest of the stuff that we're doing like sink in and really make an impact. So let me see. This is kind of where I'm ending today. So let me go ahead and pause the recording. See, I always get tricked this thing.